All right, everyone. Welcome to the meeting. We're just having a discussion on boundaries around the API versus vendor code to take into account things like firewall, networking stack, et cetera, that Joe had brought up from the TSC meeting. So Joe, if you want to go through that again real quickly for the recording, and then we can open up the floor for inputs from the team.
Yeah, so what we need is better understanding and a better description of how we interface to vendor SDKs, vendor hardware acceleration, and vendor software that's proprietary that that we need common APIs for. And we need essentially a plan or a North Star for how all that's going to fit together. And I know we've done some of that work off and on over the last year, but we need to put together a coherent plan to move the project forward. I think one of the things that a bit of what we're lacking is what is our North Star? What would things look like if we got everything done for some definition of everything? And as I was saying before, we'd like to have a readout for that idea on the July 20th TSC call.
Now, do we also need to include the open source boundary? And I ask that because it's not just vendor code, but we also have open source code that'll probably be included in that.
Yeah, I don't see why not.
Okay.
So I guess for everyone on the call, is this a useful topic to tackle? Is this like, that it's just going to, spend a bunch of time and we're not going to actually get anywhere because it's sort of an intractable problem? Do we need to basically tackle it piece by piece? And you guys have been in the API working group for a long time. How far have we gotten on this piece?
So this is John McDowell. I've not been in the group for a long time, but I can give you a perspective for what we'd be looking for, like from Palo Alto Networks point of view.
Sure, that'd be good, John.
The 4 areas that are important to us, or where we see advantage DPUs. One is and most of this is all trying to do things in line. The SSL acceleration, because more and more stuff's becoming SSL, so we need to decrypt and encrypt. So that's a huge hit. DPUs providing SSL acceleration, that's a big win. The other is IPsec for exactly the same reason. IPsec gateways and 5G are becoming a big not challenge, just the widely used, and sticking all that stuff into x86, it just consumes an awful lot of cycles that can be better used elsewhere. The other is, as everybody's just talking about, is DPI. So L7 processing is another huge CPU sink on x86. If there's a way to accelerate inline, I'm also a little bit hesitant of look aside, because you're using memory cycles to move things aside and do things and move them back again. I think we've all been through lots of iterations where we've tried to use accelerator chips that don't really work, or they work, but they don't work for sort of general use cases. The other thing with DPI, it's not just the API, it's also it's how you define what you're going to do regex on, what the sort of the language is for the regex. Standardizing that, I think, is important, because if we have to define things different ways for every DPU, challenging. I mean, we have a pipeline that creates new signatures and new threat signatures, and on a sort of daily basis, and having to do that in 5 different DPUs would be difficult. And then the last thing is just the sort of moving more of the networking into the DPU switch, so we can do networking at line rate is also a huge advantage, but yet getting the results into memory either in x86 or in ARM, so we're not having to do packet inspection twice. So that's my quick off the top of my head summary. I don't know if it makes sense to anybody or any questions.
So John, when you talk about moving it into the memory, are you referring to direct memory placement or doing the DPI prior to placing it into that, say, direct memory interface? So
basically as fast as possible, but anytime you have to move things from one memory region to another, there's an overhead, and
right.
sometimes that overhead is greater than the acceleration you get. So, and for our examples, we're processing hundreds of thousands of flows concurrently. So it's not just doing one memory move, it's doing hundreds of thousands. So I'm a little vague because I'm not sure the best way to do this. So basically open suggestions.
No. They're good points that you're bringing up, and it's probably things that we haven't delved into in detail. I know we've done an IPsec version that's out there, but it's tied around Strong Swan. Are there other views of IPsec that would be of interest?
There's one I see Cilium using. The name escapes me for a minute. Begins with a W. Strong Swan is fine. I mean, I think sometimes the issue of IPsec is not its interoperability, because it's typically IPsec is not done between the same 2 vendors. It's done between it's done between different vendors, which always raises challenges. So, but if it's done between, if DPU to DPU, and we have a standard there, that makes it a lot easier.
Okay.
Yeah, would you be able to write just a little outline saying, hey, from the point of view of an external piece of software, here are the kind of things that would be good to have common across DPU vendors, from an API perspective, to make running across multiple basically models and brands of DPU better, right? Because even within single vendors, sometimes there's a diversification of models, and having a common API across those is valuable as well. And sometimes an open, a standard open standard version is the easiest thing to do, especially if multiple teams are implementing. So would you mind taking exactly what you said and then just putting it just in outline form? We don't need huge amounts of text justifying. We just sort of need the general outline you said, because I think it was a good one.
Sure, I can do it.
Yeah, and if you can put it in an MD file, we can put it on the top level of the API work stream. It's just considerations or something like that. And there is an open items markdown page, but I don't think it fits there. This is just things that we have to consider. So
yeah, I'll just send you an MD file. So
that works. Okay.
And the other part for IPsec and SSL is just all the algorithms, having commutative algorithms, because they keep changing, because as we find problems with them.
Yeah, they keep changing, and of course, the other thing that you have to ask yourself when you start looking at SSL, GLS, those types of algorithms is, do you need to have something that is federal approved in addition to just the general community views?
Yeah, I mean, typically we have the common sets of things, and then we have a specific set of stuff for federal, because you have to go through a bunch of hoops to get federal approval. So that's usually done separately. It's the same thing, but just you've got to go through a much more rigorous set of checks.
Correct. Okay. No,
So
that was good input. Thank you, John. Any other inputs from folks on this? I mean, we have, and I'm going to try to pull them up here in a second as soon as I find them. We have some of the diagrams that we did way back on, see if I can find them. Wrong one. Here we go. Hopefully this will share okay. This is just, it's an older diagram. I hope everybody can see it. I'll shrink down the window, maybe it'll make it larger. But this is kind of where we started drawing the boundary. There's probably a lot more details that we need to flush out in terms of, you know, what the interfaces are, what the different shims can potentially communicate with. And then I think if you were to build a flow through the system and essentially, you know, attach different applications that are co-resident in a DPU, you know, you're basically going to, let's say if you put a firewall in there, you know, you're going to have that firewall interface in addition to, you know, the gym layer and how that would tie in, similar to what we have with the OTel collector and things like that. So this is, I know this is not the detail you're looking for, Joe, when you brought up the discussion points. So we have to drive this out further, but this is what we did initially.
Yeah, the next level is the type of stuff John was just discussing.
Yep.
And then details on each of those items or each of these items, I think we have to work through. And we need to know, so, you know, Boris had put the some bridges in that were meant to be part of an interface to the vendor implementations, and those didn't really have any uptake. So from the DPU vendor point of view, what do we have to do? And then just like for John with Palo Alto Networks, if we had, you know, F5 input and Red Hat input, I think it would be extremely valuable to say, you know, here's what we need to see to make this useful. And you know, we just heard from you know, NTT on their All Photonics Ion Fabric use case and what they want to do from sort of a telco. And basically I asked Alad to summarize the those points and NTT as well to bring in where they would need and benefit from commonality. And because again, to drive adoption into telco and enterprise and build an ecosystem around this, those points of commonality that people actually care about now that we're actually trying to deploy are important. And what we saw at the SmartNIC Summit is, you know, and what we see from the analysts is they're projecting the next wave of DPU is, you know, sort of tier 2 cloud, I'll call it. And, you know, they have some other definitions in there. And then the wave after that is enterprise, well, telco and then enterprise. So it's sort of that cascade, but we need to be ahead of that and can help accelerate that. And that's good for everyone, right? So if it's a company that sells servers, you sell more servers. If it's a company that sells, you know, control plane software and orchestration software, you get more of that. If you're a DPU vendor, obviously you want more DPUs everywhere, right? We need the sort of rises all boats old trope to be true. And then it also makes OPI relevant if we can sort of outline something that everyone cares about. And I think the server storage network integration that Verizon had asked for originally, how to do that chaining is another thing to tackle, but I think that one's actually quite difficult. So we can start with a lesser included problem of software using OPI, control plane using OPI, and then OPI using, vendor SDKs and getting better definition of that. And that would motivate us then, I believe, to finish and, make wider use of storage APIs, get the common networking nailed down. It would give us a way to put that work in context. Although again, that work and the detail it's in could continue in parallel. Thoughts, feedback? Am I completely off base and insane, which I've been accused of many times? So it's perfectly okay.
Yeah, I think it's okay, but I don't see anybody from the group saying anything else. So, I know I see Stephen on here. Stephen, do you have any view in terms of the need from your view on this architectural or vendor interface view?
I don't have anything at this time, no.
Okay, so would it align with what the Kubernetes view was that we talked about several weeks back?
I'm not sure. I think I would really need Donald or Miriam to talk about that. And it doesn't look like we have them today. I think they're on PTO this week.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's no worries at all. This is really just to tee up the conversation and get people thinking about it. This will take us, again, if we're diligent, this will take us, a month to kind of sort out and get an initial proposal, just realistically, especially with the holiday next week and a lot of people taking off summer vacation. So it'll take a month or 6 weeks. But I think if we do that, if we do this exercise, we can better anchor the work for both lifecycle and provisioning and API working groups, and we can have the use case group sort of drive the next level down. Because what occurred to me when we did the SmartNIC summit and so on is that, we need kind of the next level down in the use case group to make OPI, so we know what OPI should actually care about.
Well, I think, Joe, the other thing that has to be considered here is, we have a lot of these different bridge solutions that are independently running, but I think we have to start looking at how you think about combining them together into a cohesive example that somebody could run, right? So, you take the inventory and a prototype of the network, let's say, and a prototype of the storage and combine them together to make it, here's an example of how you would do an overall interface that would drive the different capabilities. And maybe you just start with inventory and networking to start with and then build up from there.
Sure.
I
Toshi?
can speak from the HPE point of view. We'd like to have common API defined for the external controllers, such as the provisioning, or in case of the Kubernetes, it's a CNI. And I think the very simple case that could be an Ansible script type of the controller. And the DPU to provide northbound API that is on top of the network operating systems. And I think the current API is being defined, like the security or storage and network. Those are, from my point of view, a light level of the APIs, which allow us to basically externally control the DPU And that controller doesn't have to be specific to the particular vendors. I think the SDK API is important, like a SAI or a Dash, but I don't think OPI needs to come up with the new SDK APIs. I think it's okay to OPI to endorse some of the existing SDK, but I don't think OPI should define the new SDK APIs. And another ability we are also interested in is the allow us to extend the network operating systems, such as using the containers and install that additional applications on top of the DPU. I don't know if we can come up with the common APIs, but if OPI can encourage the DPU vendors to support like a container mechanism, which allow us to basically install the additional software, would be nice as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Toshi. The aspect of the APIs themselves, I think, you know, our goal has been all along to just recommend existing ones that are out there, which is why, you know, we have the initial recommendation of, you know, let's try to fit it into OpenConfig. And what we've got is we've got contributions of what, you know, currently Vipin with AMD Pensando has put out as the cloud view that they've been using on their system. And then of course, we've gotten the inputs from Intel and Ericsson on the EVPN type of view. And what we'd like to do is see, can we migrate a lot of this into more of the open standard types, and then just make the recommendation around that. We haven't gotten to that point yet, but at least we're starting to look at it and see how all of these can be kind of merged, migrated, and pulled together into a common one. So yeah, I agree completely that we need to focus more and try to drive this more toward the standards. Okay. Anything else any other topics, any other inputs from folks out there on this? In the meantime, we can start coming up with what we believe the boundary view would look like for the API to the open source and vendor code, and looking at that. The other piece, you know, in terms of looking at the external controller, you know, Ansible is one way of doing it. We probably also need to look at it from the standards that are out there to see how we can provision. Right now, most of our bridge examples rely on the fact that there's a pre-configured setup for the most part, and then they go in and configure the higher level details. So what we have to look at next is, okay, how do you do all of that pre-configuration for setting up all of the different VFs that get exposed to the pods that might reside in the host, or to the VMs that might reside into the host CPU? How do you tie all those linkages together in terms of that pre-provisioning before we move to the step of, you know, configuring and setting up the different flows, the EVPNs, the VXLANs, et cetera? Joe, were you about to say something?
No, this is all great. Sorry.
Okay.
Too much background. I should have got on mute if I'm going to type. So the only thing I'll ask is, Toshi, I think your summary, just like John's, is very good. Again, can you put that in a markdown file again and again, or maybe we can use the same markdown file or something? We need a place to start gathering all of these things in a written form, so we can, you know, organize and consolidate them and review them. and make some decisions. But I'd love to have just an outline. We don't need, pages of flowery text, and don't use Chat GTP.
Yeah, and if either one of you just want to pull together a markdown file, if you send it to me, I'll try to combine it together.
Yeah, that can also work. So again, yeah, that would be fantastic. So Toshi, is that all right?
Sure.
I think what you said was fantastic, just like John.
All right. Any other inputs or any other topics we want to discuss today? All right. Well, with that, I will give people time back on their calendars. I will put out a query for next week to see if there's any topics. I know in the US it's a holiday week, so we may decide that we want to postpone next week's meeting, but I'll leave that up to the group, and I'll make a request for topics for next week prior to the meeting again. And with that, I will go ahead and close out the meeting. Everybody have a good remainder of the week, and we'll see about whether we're meeting next week or the week after that. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Have a good weekend.
Hi, guys.
Later.